Hi all, welcome to this next session of the World Stem Cell Summit, and thank you for joining us today. It is my honor and delight to welcome our panelists today, Dr. Maria Millan from CERM, Brock Reeve from the Harvard Stem Cell Institute, and Dr. Michael May from CCRM. The way this session is going to work is we're all going to give a short presentation about our organizations, and then we'll head into the panel discussion. So I'll just kick things off here quick by introducing myself and MSCRF. Here are our panelists again. So my name is Amritha Jaishankar. I am the Executive Director of the Maryland Stem Cell Research Fund. We are a state-funded initiative. Our goal really is to accelerate human stem cell-based research, commercialization, and cures. We've invested over $170 million in over 500 awards through 6 of our programs to achieve this. Our focus really is to identify and foster cutting-edge research and innovation in regenerative medicine in Maryland. To this end, our Accelerating Cures initiative comprises of 6 different programs, all the way from early stage research through companies to clinical trials, as well as mechanisms to support the next generation of scientists and leaders. While we're all about stem cells, we're really disease agnostic. So in the past year, we were able to fund several world-class organizations to look at over 27 disease indications, which account, several of this account for over the top 10 leading causes of death in Maryland and across the nation, such as cancer, heart disease, diabetes, stroke, Alzheimer's. And we were also able to support some research concerning COVID-19 related ARDS. So besides our programs, we really are about building a community and shaping the regenerative medicine field in our region. And we do this essentially through 3 pillars, right? So we foster research and innovation. We help build great companies, and we serve as the connective tissue. So through our university-based programs, we really try to encourage these high-risk, high-reward ideas and new investigators in the field, which traditional federal funding and investors can't normally support. And we engage early, we build teams, shape research, and drive commercialization. And then through our validation, commercialization, and clinical programs, we really create value through milestone-based programs. We de-risk technologies, we forge collaborations, we discover, invest in, and help build great companies that stay and grow with the ultimate goal of advancing science and accelerating cures. And then we also serve as the connective tissue. So we're the resource here that connects the regenerative medicine ecosystem, and we build alliances and partnerships with all key stakeholders, whether it's locally or globally. So building an ecosystem is really key to our success. And of course, everything starts with great science and innovation. So we're really thrilled to work alongside our world-class research institutes and universities here. We have a strong, growing portfolio of stem cell companies that I'm really proud of, several of whom have raised a lot of follow-on funding and 2 IPOs. And of course, the larger community that we work with here as well. So in the interest of time, I'm keeping it short, but please feel free to visit our website to learn more about our funding opportunities, our current awardees, and our portfolio companies, many of whom are joining us here at this conference, and they're the absolute best to work with. If you can't get enough of us, feel free to download our app. We post daily stem cell news and regenerative medicine news, so stay connected to us. And I'm just going to end by saying we truly are about building a community here and giving every project the best chance to succeed. And like everybody else on the panel here today, as you will hear, we're much more than just the funding. So we help them with resources, help them meet milestones, overcome obstacles, leverage funding, and just ensure that each one of them succeeds. Above all, it's personal. So it's personal because I trained as a stem cell scientist in this region. This is my community. I'm here to help. It's personal because we individually meet with every single person we've awarded, sometimes those that we can't fund as well, because we really are committed to this personal hands-on approach with an emphasis on collaboration to just move the science forward and help them succeed. And of course, it's personal because of patients like Yatunde and Lily and countless others whose lives are saved because of our collective efforts to advance stem cell treatments and cures. And this inspires me every day. So thank you for your time. Feel free to reach out to me to learn more or to engage with us. And with that, I hand over the virtual stage to Maria Millan.
Thank you so much, Amritha. It's wonderful to be here. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we see your whole screen, so you might just want to share the PDF.
Okay, I'm going to try to do that right now. You see it now?
We still see your whole screen.
Now?
Maria, let me share it.
Okay. You can cut this out in the editing.
Absolutely.
I'm going to stop sharing, okay?
So, yeah, so can you see now? I'm sharing your slides, Maria.
Okay, perfect. So much better. Thank you so much, Amritha. That was a wonderful introduction. So I'm Maria Millan, and I represent the California Institute for Regenerative Medicine. Wonderful to be here. Also with mission-driven organizations represented on this panel today. So CIRM has a mission to accelerate stem cell regenerative medicine treatments to patients with unmet medical needs. We were the first in its kind funding agency specifically for stem cell regenerative medicine, formed in 2004 through Proposition 71, which authorized $3 billion in bond funding to create CIRM. And now I'm pleased to say that this mission continues through Prop 14, which was just passed this past November, reauthorizing another $5.5 billion to continue this work. Both of these landmark events were made possible through patient advocacy and science advocacy. And this is quite remarkable if we think of the fact that the human embryonic stem cell had just been isolated 6 years prior to the initial formation of CIRM. Since its formation, Amritha, I'm so sorry, I was still on the first slide. I think I should start again. What do you think?
Sure.
Yeah, I'm so sorry. Maybe I'll just start. Maybe I'll say next slide to you. How's that sound? Because it's hard for you to kind of know, right?
Sure.
I apologize. So anyway, thank you so much, Amritha, for this opportunity to be on the panel with all of the other representatives. CIRM is also a mission-driven organization, as are my fellow panelists and their organizations I represent. The mission of CIRM is to accelerate stem cell and regenerative medicine to patients with unmet medical needs. It was first formed in 2004 through the Proposition 71 with $3 billion in authorized funding, and reauthorized this past November with $5.5 billion bond initiative. Both of these landmark events were made possible by patient and science advocacy. Next slide, please. Given that this initial formation of CIRM was just 2004, 6 years after the first isolation of the human embryonic stem cell, it's quite remarkable how the field has truly expanded. The field actually didn't exist really as a field in 2004. Many scientists were starting to venture into this area of research, but they were hard pressed to find funding. So fast forward to today, with CIRM funding and $3 billion, over $2.8 billion were deployed in the areas of to fund critical infrastructure, education programs, discovery, translation, and clinical research. Over 1,030 programs have been funded under Prop 71, and 70 clinical trials, and often first in human stem cell, genomic, gene therapy, and associated regenerative medicine. Next slide, please. In the final 5 years of Prop 71, we achieved the goals of building a pipeline, advancing and cutting the time to development, and increasing industry pull. We did this through an accelerating machinery and a unique funding model that's milestone-based and also open all the time with a predictable funding cycle. So we're pleased that we're able to continue this with renewed funding. Next slide, please. Over 70 clinical trials have been funded in orphan diseases, rare indications, as well as broad indications where there are no treatments or cures, across over 35 indications. Next slide, please. And the type of funding model and portfolio that CIRM has supported have led to landmark partnerships such as the Cure Sickle Cell initiative, co-funding partnership with the NHLBI. So sickle cell disease is a deadly disease resulting in multiple crises due to a defect in the hemoglobin from a single point mutation. So today, with the advances in genomics, there is and gene therapy and gene editing approaches, including CRISPR-Cas9, we do, the scientific community feels that cure is around the corner. And this has led to this Cure Sickle Cell partnership with the NIH, which amplifies CIRM funding, but also demonstrates how this could be leveraged toward remarkable partnerships. 6 clinical programs have been funded under this partnership, including 2 with CRISPR-Cas9. 1 is with a collaboration with Mark Walters, Jennifer Dowden at Berkeley, and Don Cohn at UCLA. And also, we're happy to say that a program out of Boston, David Williams' program, is collaborating with Don Cohn and Mark Walters in California. I wanted to just point this out because it tells the story of what Amritha has spoken about, and where our agencies really do provide the connective tissue to bring key collaborators together. And also that even though we're state funding agencies, it really enables programs across the country and around the globe. Next slide, please. In addition, CIRM funding has led to creation of critical infrastructure, such as specialized clinical network called the Alpha Clinics Network that supports stem cell and regenerative therapy clinical trials. This network is currently composed of 6 academic centers, supporting over 100 clinical trials, enrolling over 750 patients so far. The key thing about this network is that it actually has built-in collaboration, a shared IRB registries that they can tap into for identification for enrollment purposes and clinical planning, and also clinical trial agreements, which allow for collaboration where treatments can occur at some of the sites and follow up at others, recruitment at others. Next slide, please. In addition, CIRM has also funded infrastructure to enable basic research, such as linking genomics and stem cell biology across multiple institutions. That's led to metadata and primary analysis harmonization, data centralization, creation of almost 90 terabytes of data, a majority of which is available to the public, and publications and collaboration. Next slide, please. Another form of infrastructure is the creation of critical model systems, such as induced pluripotent stem cells, with CIRM funding. A cell bank of 2,600 cell lines are now made available both for research and therapeutic development. And this incorporates a variety of disease indications as well as control samples, all generated under standardized approaches and attached with some level of phenotypic and clinical data. Next slide, please. In addition, similar to how Maryland is promoting the workforce of tomorrow, CIRM has programs along the way through education and career that allows for on-ramps along the way for promising scientists to come in and gain interest in stem cell biology. So one of the examples of this is Derek Rossi, was one of the first CIRM scholars that was funding in an early education program. And the cool thing about his story is that he was a molecular biologist by training, came to California to do his postdoc, learned stem cell biology, then went on to Harvard, established his own lab. He had pursued mRNA as a stem cell project, and this became, as you know now today, the basis for revolutionary vaccine development under Moderna, who also is part of the whole against students from underrepresented communities come into these programs. Next slide, please. And similar to what my fellow panelists are doing here, we're promoting science, but also promoting partnerships with industry, public-private partnerships, because we know in order to gain access to the broader community needs to go through the commercialization pathway. So CIRM nurtures and de-risks programs initially when they first would not necessarily get funding, either through traditional funders or investors, and positions them so that they can attract funding later on. If you can see this trajectory over the past 5 years, there's been a significant increase in annual investment into our portfolio programs, now totaling over $17 billion in industry partnership. In addition, 45 spinouts have resulted from the programs funded by CIRM, and now over 50% of our clinical portfolio are partnered with industry. Next slide, please. And without going into detail, here are some of the spinouts. Next slide. And we have created an industry alliance program so that their companies and investors who are focused in regenerative medicine have an opportunity to interact more closely with our portfolio programs. And next slide. Just an idea of some key partnering events, including a $4.9 billion acquisition for one of the approaches, a novel approach based on cancer stem cells, as well as others across different indications, even gene therapy for neurologic disease, as in brain neurotherapy bio, which was recently acquired by AskBio, and then partnered with Bayer. Next slide. So after that lightning presentation, I'm pleased to say that we now are in the Prop 14 era. So what are we going to do today? So everything I presented is about building a value proposition that's shown results, acceleration, patient-centric, funder, de-risker, supporting basic translational clinical research through infrastructure and education programs. We seek to leverage and build upon this model, but addressing new questions and how to bring this out to the real world. So while advancing world-class science, building pathways to commercialization, overcoming the key bottlenecks in terms of tech transfer out of the initial academic centers to commercialization, increasing patient access to innovative treatments, and maximizing our impact through operational excellence. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you, Maria. And I invite Brock now to share his screen.
Thank you. Let me just put this on slide presentation mode. So thank you, Amritha and World Stem Cell Summit for the chance to join you, my fellow panelists here, and talk about the type of work that we do. So let me just give you a quick background of the Harvard Stem Cell Institute. Like CIRM, it was started, in this case, on paper in 2004, but instead of it being a state view of sort of response to the opportunity, it really is the result of a private institution saying how can it respond to the opportunity and challenges that stem cell science presented. So what Harvard did in 2004 is say, how could it pool the resources of the university and its affiliated hospitals together? And so Harvard has a unique footprint in this sense, because not only does it have multiple schools like many other universities do in terms of art, medical school, business school, engineering school, et cetera, but it also has 8 affiliated hospitals. It actually used to have more, but many of them have merged. And it has leading general ones such as the Mass General and the Brigham, specialty ones such as Mass Eye and Ear, the Jaws and Diabetes Center, the Dana-Farber Cancer Institute, ones focused on certain patient populations such as Boston Children's. So those are all affiliated with a Harvard Medical School, but they're not owned by the university. So there's an interesting network, to use Maria and Amritha's term, connective tissue that needs to be built here, and collaborations across institutions that are affiliated with one another, but not actually owned by a parent organization, but they all have a common mission. And there's as much research, there's actually more research going on in the hospitals than there's in the university, and research going on all the way from basic fundamental research all the way through clinical care. So one of the things that Harvard figured out is if we could sort of corral this system to get people to collaborate, work with one another, and leverage each other's resources, we could tackle some of the challenges and opportunities facing us. So what we do is we collaborate on research in order to stimulate the repair of stem cells in patients. So the whole idea of endogenous repair mechanisms. How do you develop new cell therapies, which is, or gene therapies, which is sort of what many people think about when we talk about stem cell therapy. But also, how can we create in vitro models of disease to accelerate drug discovery, to understand disease mechanism better, et cetera. And so using stem cell science as a window into different scientific avenues to think about what sort of value can be created. And the value in that is that we have this internal network across Harvard and its hospitals. And we're within the Boston ecosystem world, which from a biotech perspective is somewhat unique. So see here, we can advance stem cell biology and translational medicine in a way no other single entity can. And that's not meant to be arrogant, but it does sound a little arrogant. But what it means to do is reinforce the unique position of that Harvard has by living in the Boston ecosystem. So Maria just talked about the many world-class institutions across the state of California, but within the small geography of Boston, you not only have Harvard, MIT, and the hospitals and BU and Northeast, the academic centers, the academic hospitals, but you also have a major center of venture capital. You have large biotech companies, and you have all major pharma R&D offices that have just accelerated in the last 10 years. So there really is a very centralized ecosystem that helps when you want to go from basic research to into the clinic and into the market. And that's part of our unique point. So each organization you'll hear from today has a slightly different footprint, and that's sort of what helps make us a little bit different than the others. The way we're structured is we have myself and two faculty directors. Then we have an executive committee of a dozen faculty drawn from these different organizations. And then we have almost 400 faculty affiliated with the Institute from the different institutions that I described. These faculty live in their own departments, they live in their own institutions, but they collaborate and work with and sort of connect with each other in the network that we build. By the way, those of you who are interested in IP issues will realize that when I say their own institutions means that when we fund work, we don't own the IP that resides with the institutions where that work happens, but we're part of the sort of the glue that makes it work. So we raise money. We don't have state funding behind our work, but we're totally dependent on philanthropy. On average, we've raised over the last 15 years, we've raised between $10 and $15 million a year in philanthropy to fund work in three major buckets, what we call C grants, disease programs, and then individual awards. And then we also develop some shared resources, such as shared facilities, some of which we build ourselves, such as an IPS core, but then we can also leverage, for example, a manufacturing facility that's at the Dana-Farber, or a bioinformatics core that's at the School of Public Health. I'll talk about some of these other programs in a second. But what's key to them is collaboration. So, for example, we have 8 disease programs. Each one of those is headed by a person or a couple of people, and is comprised of people from several institutions. So, and the projects that we fund cross individual labs, individual PI, individual institutional lines in order to both understand disease as well as develop solutions. At the same time, we realize that there are programs that cross disease areas. So, for example, the person who headed our Reeve program years ago started a program in fibrosis, looking across organ systems. And there we're collaborating very actively with a couple of large pharmaceutical companies, and doing joint research in these areas across institution, across organ systems in a way, again, that no single lab would do. And similarly, the sort of stem cells as tools notion also across some of these disease areas. We also collaborate with foundations, with private foundations, both private ones such as the Bill Bose Foundation that has funded a lot of our early stage seed grants. And we also collaborate with disease specific foundations such as the JRF, Spinal Muscular Atrophy Foundation, others. So working with foundations to accelerate work is key to what we do. At the very early ends, and it's also true at the back end. So, for example, at the Harvard Business School a few years ago, there was an incubator was built, funded by some donors. It's called the Harvard Life Lab, modeling after a tech incubator that was built on the business school campus, and it's available to any Harvard PI with an idea for a biotech startup. And so there's several, in fact, there are a couple of companies founded by some of our faculty that are in the Life Lab right now, and some are exiting as they're trying to grow. So having a resource like that for helping incubate companies on campus is a huge asset on that end. Our mission is to let me back up for a second. But one of the reasons of forming the Institute in the beginning was not just to do the basic research, but also to have an impact on the market and in the clinic. One of the ways to do that is not only licensing into intellectual property, but also forming startup companies. So over the last decade, some 40 companies have been founded by HSCI scientists. Maria just mentioned Moderna. We actually funded we will point out to Michael that he is a refugee from Canada to the US, but that's all jokes aside. For example, HSCI funded an early stage grant in Derek's lab back in 2009 that formed the foundational IP that went into Moderna. Admittedly, we didn't know at the time that was going to be, the basis for, a vaccine. But we thought of it as a way to reprogram cells, which then led to a new way of delivering therapeutics, which then in turn led to, vaccines. So some of these ideas in the early stages, you don't know what they're actually going to turn into. So none of us who show you all these exciting startup companies can claim that we saw how they were going to develop over time. But by being able to enable good science and bet on good people and create the right environment to create these sort of opportunities, I think we'll end up having a major transformative effect on the field and on healthcare, as we're starting to see now as some of these cell and gene therapies and related products are actually coming to market. And with that, I'll thank you and stop sharing so others can share.
Great, thank you, Brock. And I invite Michael May from CCRM to join us.
Excellent. Well, look, it's a pleasure to be here. CCRM is 10 years old this year, and it's just so amazing to see how all of these organizations and the industry has grown and thrived over that 10-year period. So it's a pleasure to be here. CCRM was created 10 years ago, really to create a sustainable industry and ecosystem, Brock, so that all the innovations don't have to go to the US actually and be refugees in the US. And so we established CCRM as a public-private partnership to accelerate the development of cell and gene therapies and also the enabling technologies underlying those therapies. CCRM is a public-private partnership. It's a nonprofit at the highest level, but has a series of for-profit subsidiaries and to attract investment. and also has a foundation to attract philanthropy, but also to be the conduit through which we can kind of return the successes, the financial successes of CCRM back into the academic ecosystem as part of our overall sustainability model. So we were founded with modest investment from the government. 90% of our funding in the early years was from government. Now only 10% of our funding comes from government. The rest based on revenue we generate and industry partnerships. We've grown to over 150 employees now, and have partnerships across Canada, but really around the world in academia, industry, and with investors. And are really proud that the leverage that we've produced is significant with on the back of kind of CCRM support over $1 billion into the academic partners and industry partners of CCRM. We're based in downtown Toronto, or headquartered in downtown Toronto, in another kind of rich ecosystem in the middle of 10 research hospitals and the University of Toronto, one of the largest health science ecosystems in North America. The model of CCRM is common sense, with that ecosystem focus and the understanding that if you get the ecosystem right, everything else will fall into place. We started by building an academic consortium with access to intellectual property from those institutions. And on the back of the reputation of the scientists and the institutions, we grew an industry consortium from 13 companies in the early days to now well over 100, 110 companies from around the world, representing all sectors, manufacturing, reagents and tools, therapeutics companies. And then over the last several years, with looking at hundreds of opportunities and starting to generate impact, we're building the third network, which is an investor network. Again, understanding that access to private capital is really needed to fuel the model of CCRM. But with those networks and access to IP and really the understanding of the market and market pull, we have 6 teams at CCRM that really represent, expertise, specialized funding, and gap-filling infrastructure to do 3 things. One is proprietary development, where we source intellectual property, due diligence on it like a tech-focused VC, bundle those technologies together strategically as opposed to reactively like a tech transfer office would do, and then de-risk the technologies with in-house support and advance them. And this is really all about enhancing the quality and the quantity of the deal flow in the ecosystem. The team also provides contract services, gap-filling contract services, particularly in manufacturing. And for us, that attracts partners, but also and builds reputation. But what it really does for us is builds our capabilities so that we can use those capabilities to do proprietary development, i.e. company creation, in a more capital efficient and collaborative manner. And then the third thing we do at a very modest level, but want to grow, as I'll talk about, is we act as seed investors to catalyze outside investment. And that's really at the heart of our sustainability model. Then when we exit from being investors and founders in companies, we can recycle and reinvest back into the CCRM or back into the ecosystem. So, our strategy has really been, if you want to create a sustainable ecosystem, if you're masters of the manufacturing, if you can catalyze capital investment or private capital, and if you can nurture talent, you'll create that vibrant ecosystem. And so there's kind of 3 areas of focus of CCRM. The first being to grow a continuum of manufacturing capability. And so at the front end of this is the Center for Advanced Cell Therapy Technologies. It's a partnership with Cytiva, about 40 employees that do both manufacturing technology development, so creating new workflows and unit operations to enable manufacturing of the future. And then that team also does fee-for-service process development and scale up with the therapeutics companies. 10,000 square foot facility full of all kinds of great toys. And as I mentioned, a partnership with Cytiva. That is seamlessly connected to GMP clinical stage GMP compliant facility, 10 clean rooms, where 2 of those are focused on viral vector production. And that's a partnership with a local hospital to enable clinical phase manufacturing. And then what we're working on right now is a spinoff from CCRM, a for-profit spinoff called Omnia Bio, which will be connected to these 2 other initiatives, but represent commercial scale manufacturing in about 50 kilometers outside of Toronto and more industrial lands to really round out the manufacturing continuum that we've been building over at CCRM over the last 7 or 8 years. And then in parallel with that continuum of manufacturing capability, we're building a continuum of strategic investment. As I mentioned, we've built an investor network, and that represents kind of ready receptors for investments over time. And then at the early stages, CCRM has been investing small amounts of money in technology development with cash, but also by providing services for equity. And then what we're doing now is filling in the gap in the middle with specialized investment funds to fill that gap. A therapeutic focused seed fund, and also kind of special purpose vehicles focused on enabling technology development and early stage therapeutic technology development. And a spinoff, a for-profit spinoff of CCRM is CCRM Enterprises, which is our investment arm driving this development of a investment continuum. And then the third continuum that we're focused on is talent development. And this is where we partner with a lot of our peer organizations across the country to provide a forum for, at the interface of academia and industry around innovation and technology development, but where we also provide entrepreneurial opportunities for folks and access to spin-off companies and other opportunities. But there's 2 areas of focus, particularly CCRM. One, which is industry focused, is an entrepreneurship in residence program to help drive the companies that we're incubating at CCRM. And then on the academic side is a training center for GMP manufacturing, where we see a major gap moving forward in the industry. So just a couple of summary slides. So at CCRM, we were founded 10 years ago to really build an ecosystem that has been realized in significant academic, industry, and investor networks around the world, investing in and delivering on a number of manufacturing initiatives, from process development to clinical stage manufacturing to now commercial scale manufacturing, supporting a number of companies that have raised $700 or $800 million on the back of modest investment from CCRM. One of which, AvroBio, has went public about a year and a half ago, and we've been able to reinvest that return back into the ecosystem. Some very key academic partnerships around clinical trial support and synthetic biology. And then, as I mentioned, the establishment of a for-profit investment arm, Enterprises, and our first, franchise of the CCRM model. Franchise might not be the right word, but first step towards building a global network of commercialization hubs, like what we've built in Canada, to create a global network and to scale IP sharing, investment, manufacturing, and access to markets around the world. So I will end there, and you're really excited about the opportunity to engage in some discussion. Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much, Michael. Well, this is great. Great introduction. So I think we see how much we have in common, but perhaps we'll use the panel discussion to also, some of you mentioned how we have a different footprint. So maybe we'll talk a little bit more about what each of us do in our regions as well. So Maria, I'll go to you first. Congratulations on Prop 14. We're all excited. It's important for the field. Tell us a little about it, and how it's been to keep this funding and support going, and what it takes to be successful.
Thank you so much. I guess one of the good things about this panel discussion is it allows us to highlight things we didn't have in the intro. So in Prop 14, I wanted to just make note of the fact that of the $5.5 billion, $1.5 billion of that is earmarked for diseases of the brain, CNS, so CNS research and neuropsychiatric research. Some areas of this are very, very new, will be very new and are kind of emerging, and leverages some of the advances in model systems such as iPSC, organoid models, and really leveraging the immense amount of opportunity with genomics research, so that down the line, we can overcome what's led us to some real hurdles in terms of finding solutions for neurodegenerative diseases, and especially the earlier programs in neuropsychiatric. Another aspect of the proposition is that it actually has built in there deliberate effort investment, including personnel and a steering group, called Advanced Accessibility and Affordability Work Group, formed out of the board with external advisors as well as board membership, for finding the best models to get these out to patients. In addition to coverage and everything that's related to that, one of the key things that we've already embedded into our funding programs are diversity, equity, and inclusion, and the ability to reach underserved, underrepresented communities, many of whom are the very people that need these treatments. So that's already impacted the way that we partner with our researchers in terms of making sure that that's embedded in how they design their projects and how they design their clinical trials and how they create better ways of reaching the community, outreach, education, building trust, and having the stakeholders involved. And then in addition to that, it's just continued renewed commitment to education programs and shared core lab resources, which is really critical. Many of us spoke about the power of partnership. And so to have these competency hubs and, that could be deployed not just within the California networks, but then could be the way to connect with the other institutes such as yours and your stakeholders. So that's really critical for us. Yes, we're funding in California, but the success of this effort is really our global success. So I'll just end there, and because I've said enough, and I'm looking forward to the rest of the conversation.
Yeah, great, thanks. And Brock, I know you had mentioned, it's a lot of philanthropy with Harvard. So tell us what it takes to, get that funding and succeed and keep that going and support science.
Yeah, a lot of ongoing work. So we're supported through, the University Development Office. And actually many of our large, most significant donors have been not scientists by training, but for example, alumni from the business school who say, look, I want to give back to the organization, and here's a way where I can make a difference, right? And then there are also individuals who are impacted by disease. So people give for many different reasons. But we also need to leverage that philanthropy. And so that's where the collaborations with disease foundations, with companies, with other organizations is critical to our success. We couldn't do it just on philanthropy alone. And so philanthropy can sort of be the spark that drives it, but it's never sufficient itself. And obviously, what we're also all dependent on is things like continued federal funding, right? Like NIH funding is really sort of the big, engine on the block here. So, for example, many of our early stage projects would be too risky for NIH funding, but if we can take an intelligent bet and say, let's fund this, with the idea that someone gets enough data out of it to go for an NIH grant or a program, whatever, there's value that we can create there, so that we can use philanthropy to go get downstream funding, and create a sort of positive feedback cycle. And then, partners like pharmaceutical companies or others then, become interested once you get enough data, say out of your NIH grants or others, to sort of then enter the conversation. So I think there are multiple stages of sort of how different types of funding streams play.
Right. Yes, it's really interesting, and how many key collaborators we all have, and Michael has all of them combined and has the Prime Minister visit him. So tell us about what it takes to keep CCRM going.
Well, it is really a consortium of multiple key stakeholder networks, and so there's a lot of cat herding that has to happen, and it's really about alignment of interests and being able to communicate that although all the different stakeholders have their own areas of focus and in some cases agendas and different resources and capabilities, that there's in a complex field like cell and gene therapy, regenerative medicine, that we all have to work together and we have to collaborate, because not one group can do everything. So that alignment of interests is important. But it does, obviously it takes a lot of work, but it's much easier when you can transition from alignment of interest to demonstrating success and demonstrating benefits. And this is the wonderful thing about ecosystem development, is it's non-linear. And so as successes happen, people see the successes and then it grows. And, at CCRM, we had to start from very modest beginnings and resources and leverage significantly. And I guess one of the differences between us and the other groups is, we have an internal fee for service or contract services business that drives a lot of our resources. And so the team is running a business in addition to attracting investment, deploying investment and stuff like that. And so it's a little different angle on a common mission and a common formula for, attracting resources and leveraging that to create companies and get technologies into the clinic.
Right.
If I could give a comment, that I think these sort of different types of models are important, not only the organization, but even within them. So for example, last year in Boston, Harvard, MIT, Northeastern BU, plus several companies and a couple of hospitals got together to say, let's set up a nonprofit advanced manufacturing center. Even though they're for-profit cell and gene manufacturers in town and across the country, saying when you transition these sort of cell and gene therapies out of the lab and into the clinic, there's a lot of prototype development, process refinement. Sometimes you want to kick stuff back to the lab, have it all work. That for things in this field to be successful, you need an area where those sort of experiments, those sort of therapeutic end-driven experiments can happen, but still think of them as experiments, but have a different business model, different organizational model. So there's another sort of form of, and we'll see how it plays out because it's being built now.
That's very much the model that we built with the technology development focus and the clinical phase. Now the commercial will be different, but that clinical is very much akin to the Boston model.
Yeah, and so my point is here, by definition, we had like 10 organizations coming together to build this one nonprofit thing, right? And we'll see how it plays out over the next few years, but it's an interesting model.
Yeah, no, it's great. And I think everyone sort of touched on ecosystems and, building a continuum. So this is great. So, all of us mentioned a little bit about sort of key initiatives we're involved in, but, I wonder if any of you want to expand on, how we fund, how important it is to also support early discovery while, working towards a clinical outcome and commercialization, and just how you manage that, and if you want to comment on it.
It's absolutely critical, Amritha, and so in the kind of the final 5 years of CIRM, where we were managing the remaining funds under Prop 71, One of the things that we ended up doing is really emphasizing the translational and later stage programs, just to get some, because we didn't know what the future of CIRM was going to be. And we really wanted to make sure that programs that had the chance to get to the clinics and get to patients, that we did whatever we could. And unfortunately, that meant that for a little bit, some of the discovery, the investment into discovery research had to be dialed down quite a bit. One of the things that happened during the COVID crisis is we actually had an emergency funding opportunity where we reopened all the pillars: discovery, translational and clinical, with what remaining funds we had, as well as returned funds. So when programs either don't use up all their money, or for some reason it just didn't turn out the way that the projects had intended, those funds come back to be redeployed in research. So we were able to kind of cobble things together to continue some discovery research. But now with this new funding opportunity, we're going to definitely build into it a way to continue to fund basic research throughout. This is absolutely 100% critical. We all said it: good medicine, effective medicine comes from rigorous science. It comes from discoveries. So the downstream things couldn't happen without the discoveries. So, and in fact, when you think about that $1.5 billion in the diseases of the CNS, one of the major barriers right now is the kind of really understanding basic mechanism and early stage research, but also reverse translation, because some things are making it into the clinics in cell therapy and gene therapy. And so learning from that and being able to take that back to the lab in a collaborative and a consortium approach, I think is going to yield dividends. And we're, in a stage in the history of regenerative medicine that we all have the opportunity to foster that. So that's a very exciting thing to think about.
Yeah, and I think we also have to realize that it takes a while for the fruits of basic research to pay off, right? I mean, the Moderna example we gave, earlier was probably fast in that regard, right? But for example, Maria also mentioned that was, based on work that Stu Orkin did decades ago on the fetal hemoglobin gene. And the question at that time was wondering, why does this gene turn on and off and what happens, right? So it's a pure science question. And then you realize, wait a minute, it can actually have a curative impact, but that shows up 20 years later often, right? Rough numbers. Or, there's a lot of work around the world on, stem cells for, islet cell transplants, right, for diabetes. But, it's taken labs 10 to 15 years of basic research to figure out how do you take an ES or iPS cell and turn it into a mature beta cell, right? So you have to be able to spend that time. You have to be end directed and goal directed, but also spend that time to uncover those questions to know actually how to do that. So by the time you're putting cells and genes in people, what the effect is, that they're safe, that they're, their value, they're going, the cells are going where you want them to, having that effect, et cetera, right? So I think you'll hear everyone around this table saying we need to do both. And the challenge is, how do you do both? But that is the balancing act I think we all need to.
I'm always frustrated when there are debates about, one or the other, basic research versus translation or commercialization, even industrialization. You need everything, but the front end, if you don't have a big, wide, deep, creative funnel open, at the beginning, now everything else falls apart. I think what we're learning over time is through collaboration and through different models is just how you take promising ideas and accelerate their development and, push them to, clinical translation and out to the patient. And, we're all going to get better and better at that over time and more effective and efficient at it. But nothing happens without the front end.
Right. And on that end, I don't think people sometimes realize how exciting our jobs are, in that we get to see the cutting edge ideas first. And so let me ask you a little, since I know, Michael, you mentioned too, for that you've sort of seen the field evolve over 10 years. So tell me what you're most excited about now in the field and where you see the ecosystem going in 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, well, I mean, look, I'm a bit biased, but I think that the focus on manufacturing really represents a maturation of the field, and that we're going to be driving down the costs and making products that are suitable for mass adoption. And CIRM, the alpha clinics and focus on adoption, I think, is another evolution of the industry where we've all been on this technology push mode for 10, 20 years. Now we got to think about how do we nurture adoption and support adoption. So I think that manufacturing to adoption is here, but something for the future. But what really excites me is the ability to engineer cells, and not just engineer them for function, but to engineer them for manufacturing, and to engineer them for quality assurance. I mean, it's just going to be amazing what we can produce and turn the back of these engineering tools.
Brock, Maria?
I would echo two of Michael's points and just give you a data point. For example, on the adoption issue, for example, we just had at the HSCI annual meeting, Jay Radner give a talk, and Jay is head of Novartis, head of R&D for Novartis, but he used to be a faculty member and a clinician at the Dana-Farber Institute. And he was talking about what the perspective of big pharma is on cell and gene therapy. And Novartis has it, so does Biogen, so does Vertex, so do all these companies. So it's becoming real, right? And at a scale that 5 years ago wasn't the case, right? And that'll, to Michael's point, that'll only accelerate. What it does do is put the pressure on the ability to manufacture things like cells and vectors and genes and all that good sort of stuff. And there, I think the increasing sophistication of the engineering will be interesting, right? Because people right now are looking at, can we engineer a cell to be hidden from the immune system so we can do an off-the-shelf donor cell, right?
Right.
But that would be really cool, right? At the moment, it may be a little dangerous too. So we need to understand more of the science before we do that, right? But those tools are becoming available. And when you couple that with, single cell analytics and all these other tools that we're starting to have, the ability to engineer cells as medicines, or whether it's because of payloads, whether it's because of internal engineering, whether it's because of being able to deliver molecules that can affect cells internally, I think that whole sort of intersection will be fascinating. As a result, we'll have lots of learnings around sort of big questions like, the immune system, the immune reaction that so far we don't really understand.
So those are all excellent examples. So I'm just going to bring it to kind of just drawing from where I had my beginnings as a clinician and a surgeon, as a transplant surgeon. And so I see a lot of parallels with transplantation, organ transplantation, where, the stages is just trying to get these, the organs to survive and not, avoid rejection. And now we have a whole industry. We have immunosuppression, the most sophisticated types of immunosuppression and critical care and everything that went along with it, and to actually making this a reality. So when I see that, I know it's possible. And when I observe, as you said, Amritha, we are so lucky to have front seats to this, right? We see things unfolding. As soon as we had CAR T successes, we already had next gen CAR T successes and enriched for a memory stem cell, so that there's, and now, Brock, what Brock's talking about, refinements in the biology, and what Michael's talking about, refinements in the manufacturing. It's spectacular. That, as you said earlier, somebody said, it's for real. This field is not a fleeting fancy. It's not that, okay, there's some scientists, who could potentially get, push some aspects of this forward. It's a whole, as we said before, global ecosystem, right? We have investors involved. We have policy people involved. How are we going to get this? How are we going to make this affordable? We have patient advocates who, from CERM's perspective, is woven into our very fabric. Is the reason we exist. They're partners with us, and they're very much part of the whole effort in terms of adoption, in terms of awareness, in terms of holding our feet to the fire, in terms of testing our assumptions and holding us accountable. We have this generation of scientists and physician scientists and next generation of data scientists, and then some, in terms of actually seeing this as a potential pathway, a viable career path, something that they could put their efforts and their brain power into. It's a very exciting time. So for me, the most exciting thing is I do believe we're going to have definitive treatment cures for diseases and conditions we didn't have anything for. So as a clinician, to me, that is always kind of what I'm looking at. As exciting and as complex as everything is, that's ultimately, the biggest measure of success, is that we've impacted human health and we've impacted society in that way. So I'm very excited to be here, to have the opportunity to be with you, to be in this field. I never would have imagined this is where I'd be. I thought I would be in the OR forever, but I'm really pleased to be here.
Well,
Actually, if we're all successful, Maria, maybe we can keep people out of the OR.
That's exactly right. The measure of success is the succession, right? That was like the first gen in functional replacement, and that's what's so appealing about this field.
Right. Yeah, I mean, and this is obviously, I'm really happy to be hanging with this group of people who really have the opportunity to shape this field. So, let me ask you, what do you wish you had more of in your region or in the field in general? What's next? Michael, I'll go to you first.
Talent. I mean, there are gaps in talent that we need to address as a group, and this is a great opportunity for collaboration between industry and academia. And manufacturing is one of those areas. In our region in particular, though, it's capital. I mean, we have lots of opportunities, and we need more capital to invest in companies. That's a kind of, I think that's, aside for some very specific regions in the world, that's probably a gap of many places. But capital and talent, we have to keep track of.
Rock?
Yeah, our capital needs here are a little different. I envy Maria's $5 billion, but it's not all hers, I know. But I think the capital to do early stage research, for the reasons that we talked about, because it's harder to get NIH money, but and the harder it is to get that, the more they want to see more data, they want to see more experiments, et cetera, right? And there's lots of money going into companies, right? The venture world is thriving, there's all that, but that tends to be after the early stage work is done, right? You have to show the value of an idea, you have to de-risk things, et cetera. So our system, I think, needs more of that, because there's great, terrific science, they're good people, and we just need, I think, enough to really operate that at scale. And then on the back end, I would say one of the things we do have to worry about as a society is think about how some of these therapies that we develop, which inherently can be expensive, right? And there's a big discussion, for example, about Sparks, Luxturna when it came out, or Zolgensma from Novartis, which is the gene therapy for SMA, right? With a $2 million price tag, or even sickle cell, back to your example, Maria, right? How do you have that available on a cost-effective basis worldwide, right? Where you can people who can't afford to pay, or a healthcare system can afford to pay $2 million for a specific therapy, or $500,000, or even, or whatever. And so I think how we think globally about how you can actually reach people where these diseases can have a therapeutic impact is one thing as a whole we need to tackle collectively as a system, because no individual group can do that.
I don't know if it's regionally, because right now, at least for the next 10 plus years, we have, the funding, and we have an ecosystem and we have the science and infrastructure that we can build upon. What my wish is that we could figure out the best way to create the most effective knowledge networks, because there's so much knowledge out there that I think that just connecting them truly will give some answers that we otherwise wouldn't. So Brock and I both gave the example of Derek Rossi, but it just happens to be that he was the knowledge encapsulator of mRNA because he happened to just, it followed him in his journey from his his interest in stem cells from his postdoc. He was, then at Harvard Stem Cell Institute as a stem cell researcher pursuing a technology. And again, with a lot of wisdom that this is going to lead to something. They didn't know they intended therapeutics when it spun out. And now it's therapeutics in a different way than it intended, but I'm sure it's going to, already, it's being developed for therapeutics as well. As you said, Michael or Brock, I remember you saying it's a nonlinear path. We're all traveling in these paths. If there was a way at any given time to make sure that we all got on that same bus, right? And that was that if we could just get that would be something that would overcome, it would build in efficiencies, it would decrease costs, it would decrease time. And actually it would increase the probability of solving these problems. Some of the best minds, best efforts and funding are into this. And so I think that the way to create that, and there are many efforts overcoming the privacy, tackling the privacy issues, tackling the technological issues, but it's done. It's been done for other applications. We need to do it in science. It's done for our national defense, right? We have blockchain for banks. Can we do it for science so that people don't feel threatened about losing IP, about losing their tenure because they're sharing important information that could unlock the key? So that's on my wish list.
Well, that's
actually related to the tenure point, if I can make, we've all talked about, for example, the companies or the clinical impacts some of these funding can. I think, but all these findings come out of academic research, right? And I think, but at the moment, academic institutions still hold people accountable for the number of publications, research, et cetera, right? And the idea of sort of whether, if you're interested in having an impact in the clinic doesn't count for promotion, right? So my other wish list, picking up on Maria's point, would be to have, how do you have motivations in the academic world and in sort of the clinically, commercially relevant world aligned so that you don't have that misalignment, so that you can encourage that point to accelerate some of that sort of thing.
Absolutely. Amrita, I think we should keep talking for another hour.
I know. I was
having really interesting, but it's absolutely right. What if you were rewarded for being an enabler, not being the first author or last author? What if you're rewarded for being the young creative one, rather than people saying, but are you backed by by the senior people enough? Because a lot of the ideas are coming from the younger generation of scientists, but they first have to prove themselves and have over published in order to bring an idea forward, and that cuts on innovation. So I really congratulate the investors and our stakeholders who have supported our efforts, because we're able to do that in our way. And I absolutely 100% agree with this. Aligning incentives and getting our, changing the model of how we do science for the good of patients and society, so that we could truly return back to them what they've invested in.
And this is something we spend a lot of time thinking about too, how to incentivize this. So, but you're right, we could be here all day talking, but I'm having an eye on the clock here, and I think we have to wind up. So I just want to thank you all so much for your time and for participating in this panel. And I'll just open it up for any final comments, but otherwise, thank you so much for joining this session with me.
I just want to congratulate you, Amrita, for your new role heading up the Maryland Institute. We're really excited to collaborate with you, and just happy that you've taken the leadership role there.
Thank you so much, Maria.
What wonderful last word. Congratulations.
Great.
So,
well,
actually, congratulations to all of you for the advancements you've all made in different programs, dollars, roles, et cetera. And it's been a pleasure being part of the conversation. So thanks.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you all
Yeah.
so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Cheers.
We end
Bye.
recording.